So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the East and Western Learning Connections. I'm Yuan Wang, the president of the organization. Tonight is our last session of the 5 information session series about our policies. Our vice president, Ian White, will again be leading this discussion. And Ian is the president of Canadian Council of the Blind, Toronto Visionaries. He joined us on our board. I'm very happy to have him. A great leader in serving the community, serving the organization. He has done a great deal. Thank you so much, Ian. I know we've gone through all the information session. That's a lot of time to prepare. Not to mention to help us draft the policies. Thank you, Ian. So I'll turn it over to you.
No problem, Yang. Thank you. It's actually been really interesting doing the preparation for these presentations because it really gets me to sort of dive into the policies and really come to grips with the content of them. So it's actually been a learning opportunity for me to sort of deepen my understanding of the policies and how they're structured and why they are the way they are. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you all here. Looking forward to this 5th in the series on the duties of directors. And as I said, it's been really interesting to sort of go through the series of policies from the Code of Conduct and the Conflict of Interest policy through anti-discrimination and our privacy policy. But I think for me, the biggest learning curve really came when putting this one together, because to be perfectly honest, I have been working on a board of a not-for-profit association with the CCB Toronto Visionaries, and had been doing so for about 8 years now, and really had never taken the time to step back and say, okay, well, what exactly is the role of someone at a director level in an organization like this? What are my responsibilities? What is my duty to the organization? And what does that look like under the law? It had never really occurred to me to sort of step back from my day-to-day operational involvement and ask those much larger questions. So it was a real opportunity, almost a gift, to be able to do that on behalf of East and West Learning Connections, because the board that has come together to help govern the organization, most of us are very new to the idea of being a director on a board. And so I felt it was even more important to sort of put this document together and provide some resources, I think, for people who are not familiar with how boards operate and what their obligations are. I want to start by prefacing this with the statement that I am not a lawyer. Anything I say tonight is not legal advice and cannot be construed that way. I am simply a concerned individual who is trying to do my best to volunteer with the organization and bring as much knowledge and intelligence and energy as I can to the role. Having said that, the organization itself is it's a federally regulated not-for-profit organization. And what that means is that we're registered with the Canadian government, and we actually have a charter to operate anywhere in Canada, right across the country. Our initial documents indicate that we're based in Toronto, but we basically could operate anywhere across the country if we chose to do that. But I'll get into a little bit more of that a little bit later. What I did want to mention was that the text for this evening's discussion is available on our website at eawlc.org/ It's called Duties of Directors, and those words are all separated by hyphens. So if you're interested in following along with the actual text, you can pop into the website and have a look. It's certainly there as a resource if you ever want to go back to it. So as a federally regulated not-for-profit corporation, we're actually subject to two levels of legislation. The first is the Canadian Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, which is the one that we're actually registered with. But because we also operate in the province of Ontario, the province of Ontario actually has its own Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. And like many of the legal structures in Canada, the legal frameworks are nested one within the other. So for example, the federal legislation will spell out sort of general principles and guidelines, and then the Ontario legislation will enact regulations that are tighter than what the federal government stipulates. So the hierarchy is that the federal government sets out general policies, and then the provinces will pass laws that make those regulations even more strict. It never works the other way around. The Ontario provincial government doesn't have the power to undo things that the federal government mandates. They can only make them stricter. And of course, when you go down to the municipal level, if there's a municipal level that applies, that's even stricter as well. I think of examples like the building code. There's a national building code that spells out how buildings should be constructed. Each of the provinces either adopts that code as their building code, or they create their own. There's an Ontario building code that has rules that are even more strict than the federal building code stipulates. And then within each municipality, there are regulations and bylaws that will make even the Ontario regulations more strict. So that's sort of the way Canadian law works, is it works on a hierarchical basis, moving from more general to more strict. So as a not-for-profit, federally regulated, but operating in Ontario, we're subject to both those acts. So who does this policy apply to? Right at the top of the policy, you'll see that there's a target audience, and it talks about the fact that this policy is specifically targeted to those people who are involved on the board as voting members. And I'll just explain a little bit more about that. There are opportunities for people to advise the board or to act in an advisory capacity, either as a past president or as a special advisor to the board. But when it comes down to an actual vote on a resolution, it's the people who have voting authority, the directors of the board, who actually have the prerogative to pass a resolution or decline it. So they are the people that really have the power to decide how East and West Learning Connections is going to move forward. What sorts of policies we'll adopt, what sorts of bylaws we'll set in place, what our mission statement is going to be, how we're going to generate programs. And really, it's because they have the decision-making power that they need to be aware of what their obligations are as directors on the board. They need to be aware of what those obligations are in order to most effectively make the decisions that are going to move the organization forward. The directors are actually legally responsible for good governance. And they're the ones who really make the decisions that will either help or hurt the organization. And so they need to be as conversant as they can be with their obligations and their duties, what they can do and what they can't do as directors, because there are things that we can't do. So they really do have a legal responsibility to make the best decisions that they can on behalf of the organization. So one of the things that is a requirement is that as directors, we have to be as informed as we can be about the matters that come before the board for decision. There's a responsibility that we hold that requires us to be as informed as we can be. We're not required to be experts, but we do need to take our roles seriously and be as informed as we can to make the best decisions that we can. So let me step back for a second and talk a little bit about what a corporation is, because this is a concept that is a little strange, and it's, for some people, it's a little hard to wrap your head around. The word corporation actually has the same root in English as corporeal or corpus or corpse. They all refer to the body. And so basically what a corporation is it's a body. It's a theoretical person. It's legally, it is the legal embodiment of an organization, right? So it's the legal embodiment of a person under the law who cannot act for themselves. It can't protect or nourish itself because a corporation is only a theoretical thing. It doesn't have any actual agent parts. So the directors are actually the agents who act on behalf of this legally embodied entity, right? They sort of act like guardians or trustees. I was thinking, actually, it's very similar to a parent taking responsibility for a child who can't act for itself. And in the same way that a parent can be held responsible for, failing to provide the necessities of life, the directors have a legal obligation to act in the best interests of the organization. And that's called a fiduciary obligation or a fiduciary duty. And a fiduciary duty just means that they have to hold the interests of the corporation in a sort of position of primacy. They have to make sure that they are always thinking of the best interests of the corporation in order to execute their duties under their fiduciary obligation. So let's look a little bit at the duties themselves. The document itself is broken into 3 parts. 1.0, the rationale, is really just talking about how it's important for anyone who's either in a position of being a decision maker on the board to be as familiar as they can be with their duties and responsibilities. And 2.0, the purpose, really just indicates that this is a document that's meant to outline what the duties and responsibilities of a director are, so that all directors really understand clearly what their obligations are. I was thinking that there's a line from a Marvel comic called Spider-Man, where the main character, Peter Parker, is advised by his uncle that, if he's gained this great power, having all these amazing powers, that he can do all these incredible things, he has a responsibility then to govern that power. And the more the power increases, the more the responsibility increases to use that power wisely. And I think that's actually a really good analogy for the role of directors. I think that Yes, we have power to change the course of the organization. We have power to make decisions on behalf of the organization, but we also have a really clear responsibility to make those decisions with the best interests of the organization in mind, and in the best way we can on behalf of the organization that can't actually act for itself. So let's get into the meat of it. 3.0, the duties of directors. So there's a couple of definitions right off the top. What kind of a corporation we are. I mentioned earlier, we're a federally registered not-for-profit corporation. There are different kinds of registration depending on what kind of corporation you are. There are for-profit corporations, and they are governed according to a certain set of rules. There are not-for-profit corporations like ours. And as a kind of a more stringent subclass of not-for-profit corporations, there are charities. So we sit in the not-for-profit class. We're not a charity. We haven't registered with CRA for a license to be a charity. And so we're not in a position to issue tax receipts, for example, for donations, but we are governed by the rules for not-for-profits, and part of what that means is that we must use any of the funds that come to us to the best advantage for the organization. But it does mean that we're also limited in terms of the commercial practices that we can engage in order to raise funds. So not being a commercial enterprise, there are limitations on what kinds of businesses we can set up to generate funds for the organization. So we can talk a little bit about that offline, but that's a kind of another discussion. So the next item that comes up as a definition is what actually is a director? What is the definition of a director? And really what a director is one person in a collective. And that collective, known as the board, is responsible for decision-making on behalf of the organization. Each director is responsible for the administration, the guidance, and supervision of the affairs of the organization. And also responsible for providing strategic guidance and leadership. So managing the day-to-day affairs, making sure that the organization is governed well, that its programs are in line with its objectives, and that there's an eye to the future to look for opportunities for growth, opportunities for expansion, opportunities to reach a wider audience, et cetera. One of the things that's interesting, and I'll pick up on this a little bit later, is the idea that directors are required by their obligations to actively participate in these processes. And what that means is, as a director, you can't just sort of hang, the title on your door and say, I'm a director and that's great, and that's it, I'm done. You actually have an obligation to engage fully and participate fully in the decision-making of matters before the board. That's actually a legal responsibility. That's part of your duty of care. And I'll talk a little bit about the duty of care in a minute. So what can the corporation do and what can it not do? What are directors allowed to do and what are they not allowed to do? According to the research that I've done, really what directors are responsible for is making sure that the original stated goals and purposes of the organization are upheld. And what that means is that when we submitted the paperwork for registering the corporation, we submitted a very short description of the kinds of things that we would contract to engage in. And these became part of our what are called articles of incorporation or letters patent. And the idea is that those objects, those purposes in the letters patent become the driving, defining purposes that we strive to achieve as an organization. So what are our corporate purposes? From the incorporation constitution that was part of the registration process with the federal government, the purpose of the corporation. So EAWLC is a federally registered not-for-profit corporation in Canada, and it operates out of Toronto. We help people of different heritages get connected and become happy, positive contributors to the diversity of society and feel belonging. We do this through learning, communicating, mentoring, and volunteering programs. And those especially for those who are economically disadvantaged. That really is a statement of who we are and what we do. This actually is a description that I pulled straight off of our homepage website. So the text there is available for you to read at any time if you want. It's actually comprises most or all of our mission statement. So basically what that means is, we can run 4 categories of programs as long as those programs help people of different heritages become positive contributors to society, with a special emphasis on the economically disadvantaged. Right? As long as we're doing those things, we're within our objects and we're upholding the core mission and the mandate of the organization as we've registered it. So what that means is we could build programs around volunteering. We could engage in a volunteering program that was a joint venture with other community groups to build a park or engage in some sort of communal activity that was beneficial to Toronto. We could, unfortunately, we can't do a lot of other things. We can't engage in commercial enterprises, for example. Well, actually, there are a couple of exceptions to that, but generally speaking, we can't set up a business. We can't deal in real estate. We can't, launch rockets at the moon, because none of those things are within the core of what we're trying to achieve based on what we've stated in our articles. So as long as we are making decisions that are guided by those articles and by the stated mission that we've adopted, we're doing our duty under the regulations as directors. So as I mentioned, the first duty of directors is called the fiduciary duty. And really that's an obligation to safeguard the organization's objects or their purposes, and make sure that the activities are in line with those objects. Basically, we have to do what we said we were going to do. And what's interesting is if we don't do that, if we fail to do that, if we start engaging in activities that are outside of those objects, the directors themselves could be legally, personally liable for any loss or damage to the organization. So there are repercussions if we don't do our jobs properly. And so I think when many people sort of join boards as directors, they take on that responsibility, understanding that they have a legal obligation to really act as effectively as they can in the best interests of the organization, and that there are legal repercussions if they don't. Fiduciary duty also means putting the interests of the corporation ahead of any personal interests. And exercising what's called a duty of care and a duty of loyalty. And I'll get into those in the next couple of sections that we'll talk about. Not putting your personal interests ahead of the interests of the organization basically means that you're always, as I said, you're always focused on making sure that you're taking into account what is best for the organization. And you're supposed to do that in a very sort of dispassionate and objective way. So in general, what is a director responsible for? Essentially, directors are responsible for ensuring that the objects of the corporation are properly carried out, setting the corporation's long-range objectives and strategic plans, being responsible for all aspects of the corporation's operations, so making sure that things are moving along on a day-to-day basis, ensuring the corporation's financial stability, and where applicable, supervising and managing staff or employees. So that's a pretty big bunch of responsibilities. But I think that, these are the kinds of things that as a director, you want to be able to influence, you want to be able to have an impact on, you want to be able to make sure that the organization is financially stable, that it's doing the good work that it sets out to do, and not getting confused or not wandering off the path with respect to its programming and its day-to-day operations. So, buying into the basic fundamental mission of the organization is actually really important, because it's really what's going to guide your decision-making process as you go forward as a member of the board. So in order to do all that, all directors have to be really familiar with the mission, vision, and values of the corporation, and especially its corporate objectives. You have to be really familiar with the organization's bylaws. And we're going to get into a discussion of that a little bit later, because we have an annual general meeting coming up at which the first set of bylaws will be up for approval and adoption. Quite exciting about that. We have to be very familiar with the organization's operating procedures. So the protocols that we put in place to make sure that everything moves smoothly and everybody sort of knows what to do. And as well, I think we need to be at least a little bit aware of, although we're not lawyers, a little bit aware of the legislation. So the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act and the Province of Ontario's Not-for-Profit Corporations Act as well. And I think in order to operate in any environment, you need to be aware of the local and municipal sort of legal setting as well. What bylaws are operating in the City of Toronto with respect to, how we can move, how we can gather, the kinds of permits that are required for us to do that, just to make sure that we're carrying out the business of the organization in a lawful and respectful way. As well, all directors are required to abide by the policies that are adopted by the board. And that includes many of the policies we've been discussing over these 5 sessions, the Code of Conduct, the Conflict of Interest policy, our anti-discrimination policy, our privacy policy, these duties of directors. And there will probably be at least one more policy to come, which will have to do with harassment and violence. So yeah, the part of the obligation of a director is to be familiar enough with these policies to be able to enforce them and to certainly to abide by them, so that we know that the conduct of all of our directors is in line with our expectations. So let's talk a little bit about the duty of care. under section 3.1. So what is the duty of care? So duty of care is a requirement to act with a certain level of skill and diligence. You have to there's a requirement for you to be actively engaged. There's an expression in English, just phoning it in, which basically means you're not really paying attention, you're not really invested in the process, you're not really engaged with the material, you kind of glanced at it, you didn't really look deeply at it or read it carefully to understand what the implications are, you haven't thought about it very much. And those are the kinds of attitudes and approaches that just simply will not do if you're a director of an organization. You have to be invested. You have to be careful. You have to be diligent. You have to be as careful as you can, and you have to be as informed as you can be. Now, again, none of us are experts, and the law does not require us to be experts. The law only requires that we be as careful as a reasonably prudent, careful person would be under similar circumstances. So that sounds kind of vague, but it's actually a reasonably tolerant measure of what the expectations would be. So we all know what it means to be careful. We all know what it means to be diligent. We all know what it means to be thorough in our investigations. And I think as long as we're doing the best we can to maintain those standards and gather the information we need and use sort of prudent care in making the decisions that we make, we will be abiding by the general flavor of the duty of care. 3.2, duty of loyalty, is slightly different from duty of care. It basically means that we're required to act honestly and in good faith, and to do that in the best interests of the organization. So what that basically means is, again, it's a reiteration of this idea that if you are loyal to the organization as a person, as an entity, you will always and only put the interests of that person under your care ahead of your own interests, ahead of others' interests. You will only do, to the best of your ability, what is good for the organization itself. And you'll be loyal to that idea. So in exercising your duty of loyalty, you are in fact sort of maintaining a focus on the best interests of the organization. And I think, again, as long as we all do our best to sort of keep the interests of the organization at the forefront of our thinking, we'll be making good decisions and we'll be moving the organization in the right direction. So under 3.3 board meetings, this is an interesting little clause. It's probably the most practical piece of this whole policy. And really what it talks about is the idea that in order to be a director, you have to be fully engaged. You have to show up at meetings. You have to be prepared. You have to be consistently there and consistently endeavoring to engage with the matters that come before the board and to work with your fellows on the board to arrive at some sort of consensus that you can all get behind and sort of say, okay, this is the direction we're going to take. Yes, we all agree this is the best course of action. And I think that this section really talks about the idea that you need to take this obligation seriously. You need to show up and you need to engage. And really that's the essence of what this is about. It talks about the idea that if you miss more than 2 board meetings in a row, you can be up for disciplinary action. And that's just a reminder to say, look, you can't just show up when you feel like it. You can't say, oh, my dinner's not ready, so I'm not going to go to the board meeting. Those aren't good enough. If you're going to engage as a director, you need to take the responsibility seriously and you need to engage. So, nor can you sort of show up at a meeting and just sit there and not say anything. Your obligation really is to, in order to fulfill your duty as a director, you really do need to participate as thoroughly as you can. You need to look at the suggestions that are tabled or the resolutions that are tabled, pick them apart, ask questions, bring other information to bear, work with the other people on the board, and really sort of try as best you can to make sure that the decisions that you're making really do move the organization in the direction that it's supposed to go. So directors show their engagement by, as I mentioned, informing themselves on the matters before the board and fully exercising their best judgment, and by participating in the voting on resolutions before the board. So that there really is a requirement that you be fully engaged and you be energetically and enthusiastically present whenever there's a board meeting. And that brings us really to the last section, which is 3.4, confidentiality. And really what this section says is that being bound by the code of conduct and the privacy policy, you are going to be in a position as a director where you're going to be have access to some sensitive information about financial matters, disciplinary matters. There will be private information that you'll have access to about members or volunteers, and you'll need that information in order to do your duty as a director, in order to make the best decisions you can on behalf of the organization. But in having access to that information, you also have an obligation to protect that information. And you have an obligation to keep confidential matters confidential. And you need to do that not just during the tenure of your directorship, but afterwards as well, if that information becoming public would negatively affect the organization. And again, that's the real key, is if disclosure of that information would have a negative impact on the organization, then it should be kept confidential. And that's not about keeping secrets. It's not about being secretive. It's not about withholding information that does no one any harm. It's actually part of the responsibility of being a director is to safeguard information that is of a sensitive nature and could adversely affect the organization. I know that we've had a couple of really interesting conversations over the last few weeks about this idea of privacy and freedom of speech and being able to criticize the organization. And these are all really important topics. But there is a distinction, I think, to be drawn between the kinds of information that I'm talking about, this confidential information, and the general idea of having free access to all information. Every government will tell you that they're willing to publish all kinds of information and make it public, unless that information is a threat to national security. And that's the best analogy that I can offer here, is that there are some kinds of information that the directors will deal with that are going to be a threat to the national security of the organization. I know that's kind of a funny analogy, but it's the best one I could come up with. Again, in order to execute our duties as directors. We have an obligation to be really familiar with what the organization is trying to do, how the organization is registered and structured, and what legislation applies to it. Hello. What kind of information in terms of regulations, bylaws, and what policies apply, and really sort of exercising our fiduciary duties, our duty of care, and our duty of loyalty, and really being fully engaged as decision makers on behalf of this interesting corporeal entity that cannot act for itself. So I hope that gives a fair overview of the kinds of responsibilities that directors bear. For my own sake, my own part, it's an absolute privilege to be part of this organization. I think that its goals and its aspirations, its purposes are really admirable. I think that there's a lot of good work to do, and I'm proud to be part of it. So with that, I would like to thank you and just remind you that the policies are up on our website. You can look at all of them. And if you have any other questions, I am happy to entertain them now. If you'd like to unmute yourselves and ask whatever is still puzzling.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. That's a good information.
You're welcome.
Everything, yeah. And I would like to say that the purpose we stated in our registration form when we submit, like our homepage right now, is a little bit different because we changed it a little bit different. The wording is not exactly the same, okay, but the idea is the same. So the idea, is the same. Yeah.
Good. Okay, I'm really hoping that some of you have questions, comments, queries. Or any of you, do any of you have experience working on a board of directors? I'd be curious to know.
Well, it's new to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. All of the people on the board, I think we're all sort of new to this, and we're all, we all are enthusiastic and eager to work on behalf of the organization, but none of us had ever done it before, and really didn't have a real clear idea of what our obligations were. So that was part of the conversation that generated this document. So.
Yeah, and I think one question people may have is, so you should always put the interest of the organization up front, in front. Some people say, so what if a director wants to, develop some like his or her own business, like whatever business, and the person may make use of the resources of the organization, whatever resources there.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, I fall back to the conflict of interest policy, which states very clearly that the decision-making process that occurs at the board of this organization has to be separated from any decision-making that happens outside of that. If a director wants to develop a business outside of the organization, that's fine, they can do that. What they can't do is use organization resources to help further the interests of that business outside of the organization. That would be a misuse of the resources, and it would not be in the best interest of the organization, right? When it comes to making decisions about how to allocate resources, if there is a situation where that outside business interest conflicts with the interests of the organization, then that director simply has to state that they're in a conflict of interest position and remove themselves from the discussion and the voting around that issue. Right? It doesn't mean that they have to step down as a director. It doesn't mean that they have to pull themselves out of other kinds of decision making with respect to other matters. But it does in that instance, because there's a direct conflict between the interests of this organization and the interests of their business practice.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that clear?
Oh, yes, yes. Just want to make it clear.
Mm-hmm.
Some people would ask, like, what's the good to be joining you as a board member, like board director? What would you answer that question?
For myself, it's the opportunity to help guide the organization in a good direction and to move it further towards its goals of providing, great cross-cultural programming. Ultimately, as I see it, the goals of the organization are really pointing towards opening people up to different ways of seeing the world and allowing for others to have other views than their own. And I think that's just an incredibly powerful possibility. And it really excites me. So I have an opportunity as a director to help that process along. And that's part of the reason that I want to be part of this organization. I feel that is an aspiration that is really fundamental to the Canada that I want to see. I think that we are really proud of being a multicultural society, but I don't think being a multicultural society is easy, and it takes a certain amount of work to be able to live with people with competing values, people with competing worldviews. And it takes a lot of conversation to get to a place where you can all sort of agree to move forward and accept each other as having valid perspectives. So for me, being part of this organization permits me the opportunity to influence that and to have a positive impact on that. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
Oh, great, Ian. I feel exactly the same way. Well, thank you very much for explaining that.
No problem. As I said, it's my privilege and my honor to be able to participate as a director in the organization. It's a great opportunity.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you. I wish more people, like from other heritages, could join us, could think your way. We can do this together.
Hopefully that will come over time. One of the things I have learned in working with volunteer organizations is that you sort of make use of the volunteers who show up. It's important to recognize the talents and the skills and the energy that people bring. Ultimately the goal would be to have as diverse a board of directors as the kind of community we're trying to build. But we're in very early stages right now. We're very, very early in our process. And I think that diversification will come over time as we get more established and make more connections with other community groups and involve those community groups in the learning and sort of cross-cultural fertilization that we're trying to achieve here. So I think that'll come.
Mm-hmm. And yes, even with our own members, so they're all very talented people. We need to think of ways to, make use of their talents.
Yeah, it's a big job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's a challenge. It's a challenge how to do that. Yeah. So for our participants, just please unmute yourself and come to share your opinion, your suggestions.
Yeah, please don't be shy.
All our members are eligible for director positions, so maybe
I think we've just scared them all off, though.
You are one of the directors as well. And what do you expect a director to do or not to do? What's your understanding there? Just please share.
Mm-hmm.
This is Frank. Thank you, Ian.
Hey, Frank.
Yeah.
One of our other directors.
Thank you for the good sessions. So it's for the current and the future directors, maybe.
Yeah, we have several people here. They're quite actively involved. So really hope that they can get even more involved.
Yeah, I think it's very, very good for us to keep this information, our organization, as transparent as we can, and as open as we can, which is critically important for our future growth. So more people can feel our mission is relevant to them. So we are volunteers. We're doing this for a reason. Hope this reasons can relate to everybody.
Exactly.
And our bylaws is far from being perfect. It's a continuing improving process. So by doing this, we're open for people to have suggestions and improvement for us.
I mean, part of the thing about ongoing governance is that it is a constant process of learning and bringing new information to bear on what you're trying to do and the decision making that you're trying to undergo. It's never static. It's never stale.
And I know, Helen, are you there? I know Helen is full of opinions. often gives good suggestions or ask questions. Helen, are you there? Do you have any question or comment to say? Also, Shirley. I know. Oh, and Wendy just joined. Good evening, Wendy.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi.
The information session just finished up, but we're now conversations, questions or comments, any sharing. Shirley is digesting all the information. But if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. And Wendy, do you have any question?
I'm sorry I'm late. They got something else and have to deal with. So I'm sorry to miss the most part of it. So no, I just want to be here and be supportive.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will be posting this, Yang, we're putting these together as podcasts, right?
Yes, onto our YouTube channel. I will share once, David is helping us editing all these audio clips. Once he finishes with uploading, I'll share this with people.
Good.
Or yeah.
Yeah, so Wendy, you will have a chance to hear the presentation once it goes up on the website.
Great. Thank you.
Most of the information is really, it's the policy itself is available up on the website as well. So if you want to just go through the text of it, that's a good place to start. And if you do have additional questions after the session closes, we would be happy to entertain those. If you send an email to info@eawlc.org and just ask whatever it is that's puzzling you, that would be great.
And Wendy, I know you're quite active in the community. Have you ever served on board? Do you have any experience?
From what point of view? What kind of board?
I don't know. I'm just asking whether you have been a board member for any other nonprofit organization. Because this is the question Ian asked at the very beginning of this meeting. So if people have served on board, maybe they can share, their experience.
I don't know what kind of hierarchy you are talking about. There's all kind of board, right? And I have been to or been member of executives for many non-profit organizations ever since 1989. And so I don't know what kind of level you are talking about, right? And so it's, for example, right now I'm a vice president of Jiangxi Association of Canada. You know that Jiangxi Tongxianghui, right? So
okay.
Are you consider that as a board member? Or actually it's not, right? This is just an association. It's not just like there's another organization. It's related to ethnoculture community network. It's TDSB. It's a parent group. I served as a executive or board member there, but I don't know what kind of.
Again, that sounds more like an association than an actual not-for-profit. Yeah. I think the rules are slightly different. I think a lot of the duties are transferable. I think that a lot of the same kinds of expectations are there. I'm not sure there's exactly the same legal obligation.
Yeah, to my understanding, the board member, what you're talking about is more like not only the non-profit organizations. It is a non-profit organization, but it's not. It's kind of what kind of, for example, Cancer Society. Right? That is kind of serve as a in the board member, and that kind of, right?
That's a full-blown charity. Yeah. And the directors on an organization like that would be, very, very much expected to adhere to a lot of the things that we've been talking about tonight. They would expect to, one would expect them to have, experience in various kinds of business administration or policy or marketing or, any of the things that might be useful skills to bring to bear in the decision-making processes for a large, complicated charity like that. But again, because they're a charity, the regulations are a lot more strict. And the requirements for filing with CRA are a lot more strict. I think, at this level, yes, we're a registered not-for-profit and we do have responsibilities, but as I said, we're really just getting started and doing the best we can with a series of dedicated volunteers who've come forward to help as best they can with getting the organization off the ground and making sure that it continues. So, are there any other comments or questions?
Sarah, Erica, David.
You guys are all so quiet.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have comment.
Yes.
Sure. Is that Dan?
Yeah, it's Dan.
Hi.
I have a comment about the word iron bring to us. The first phrase is open other views to the world. Open other views to the world, and cross culture. That's very powerful word, powerful phrase, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm nearsighted and a very high degree. To some extent, I think I partially lose a kind of a vision. And I understand what it means to some extent about losing vision. In the pandemic, Yang Wang enlightened me, I think. She is very devoted to the equity and anti-discrimination. So today, I think it's very important for you to conduct a discussion. My understanding is the organization, the activity of the organization basically split into two parts. One is build a business. Two is build the organization. Here is what we are doing, build the organization.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Yeah. Yes, a lot of the groundwork that we've been doing over the last several months has really been to build a solid foundation for the organization to move forward. Coming to grips with the idea of setting up an organization, setting up its administrative structures, its policies and procedures, its drafting a set of bylaws that will essentially govern how we operate. All will sort of help us to find a clearer path to getting to the work of doing what we're meant to do, which is really, engaging these 4 types of programs that will help different kinds of cultures and different cultural backgrounds come together and share their experiences with each other, and find the common ground that I think we're all looking for. But there's a lot of a lot of groundwork to lay, a lot of work to be done to get to the point where we feel like we're a solid organization and a solid operation, and we can move forward. But it has been rewarding. So, and I'm thinking that the closer we get to our first annual general meeting, which should be coming up in September, and formally electing the board of directors, although we're in positions now, we're sort of pro tem in the sense that we need a mandate from the membership in order to continue. And getting bylaws in place, and just basically sharing what we feel the direction of the organization is with the membership, and finding that common ground for starters is a good place to begin. So
yeah, and talking about the membership, Dan, did you fill out the application form to become a member, like a volunteer for EWLC?
Not yet.
Okay, well, you're welcome to do that. If you want, send me an email or via WeChat. I'd love to send you the application form. Okay. And also you talked about this anti-discrimination. I think it's a task for everyone in this country. So what we do is we want to help people of from all cultural backgrounds. They get to know each other, they communicate with each other at the individual level, and to learn together. So that's a very good way. People can really break some barriers, break some stereotypes. So we think that's a two-way process. For immigrants, we can learn Canadian cultures, we learn other people, and for people from other heritages to learn about our culture. So it's a two-way process, and in that process, like this stereotype will be broken over time. It takes time. It takes effort to do that. Yeah, and yeah, we make effort. Yeah.
It was interesting when Dan, when you were just talking a minute ago, and you mentioned that you were nearsighted, and I thought, yeah, I can relate to that. I grew up being very nearsighted, and eventually lost the rest of my vision when I was in my 40s. But yeah, I know what that's like. And I think what Yang was just saying, the idea of stereotypes and how they apply to different kinds of people. I mean, I'm in one of those stereotyped categories, being someone who is blind. Quite often people will look at me, and rather than seeing me, they will see a blind person. And then they'll project all of their fear about, what it would be like to live as a blind person onto me, and assume that there's all kinds of things that I can't do that actually I can do. But there's that disconnect, because they're making assumptions on my behalf about what I'm able to do and what I'm not. And I think that's part of what makes me empathetic, to the degree that I can be, to the plight of people of color, or people of various backgrounds, various cultures. When those stereotypes do occur, I know from personal experience how devastating that can be, how undermining it can be to my self-esteem, to my ability to contribute. And I think that it's only by sort of taking the time to educate people past their assumptions about what I'm able to do, that they're able to recognize me as a fully realized person who happens to be blind, right? And I think that's as I said, I think that's part of what makes me interested in this as an operation, as an enterprise, is the idea that we all make assumptions about each other all the time, right? And we have to be really careful about that. We have to be more open than that. And we have to recognize that it's a thing that we do and try to stop doing it. Because I think it's very easy to put a label on something and then dismiss it. And I don't think that allows for recognizing the value that we all bring, right? We all have an opportunity to participate in this crazy idea called Canada. And I think the only way we're going to achieve what Canada can be is by recognizing each other's strengths and value, and recognizing that each of us brings value, no matter where we come from or what our previous experience is. We all bring value to the process of building a better Canada. And I think that's what is really powerful about this organization, that the potential in it to create an atmosphere where we can get past those stereotypes and those assumptions and really see the value in the people who are here and what they bring to the table.
Oh, very well said, Ian.
Thank you.
And also same to us. We need to see the value of other people's, and yeah, to learn about them.
Mm-hmm.
And also, well, I want to improve myself to strengthen myself. Yeah, to become more knowledgeable, be more open-minded. Yeah.
Well, hopefully through all of the programs that we run, that that will be the end goal, right?
Yes.
That's
so
what we're hoping.
that's the purpose. We're bringing all those learning opportunities so we can actually learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dan, did you have another comment?
Yes. Yeah. We can focus on possibility, not on limitation.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
All right.
All right. So do any other person now, participant here, have any questions or comments?
There's a dog outside my house who seems to have an opinion.
All right, then maybe we'll call it the night.
All right. Well, listen, I want to just say thank you to you all for coming and hearing the presentation. It's great to have you all here and be engaged and interested, and I hope that you'll continue to participate fully in the activities that East and West Learning Connections offers. It's going to be a fun ride.
Yeah, thank you, Ian, very much. You've done 5 consecutive sessions so well. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for
you.
now.
Okay.
Bye.
Have a good night. Mm-hmm.